The first gunshot tore through the silence of the Montana night like a jagged claw, jolting Naomi Sullivan awake from where she had finally collapsed, exhausted, beside the dusty trail. Her arms instinctively tightened around the bundle pressed against her chest. Her daughter, just 3 years old, and mercifully still asleep, despite the violence that had haunted their steps for days now. The year was 1878, and the unforgiving plains of Montana Territory offered no comfort to a young widow with nothing but a small sack of provisions and a child to protect. Naomi's breath caught in her throat as a second shot rang out, closer this time, echoing across the empty landscape. She curled protectively around little Emma, pressing them both deeper into the slight depression beside the trail where she had sought refuge as night fell. The pounding of hooves grew louder, and Naomi silently prayed that whoever approached would pass by without noticing them. Her chapped lips moved in silent pleas as she pulled the worn shawl over Emma's sleeping form, trying to shield the child from both the cool night air and any prying eyes. "Think they went this way?" a gruff voice called out, too close for comfort. "Had to," another replied. "Woman can't have gone far on foot with a young un." Dread pooled in Naomi's stomach. They were looking for her. 3 days ago, she had witnessed something she shouldn't have: a ruthless murder by the notorious Blackwell gang outside the tiny settlement of White Rock. She'd been gathering kindling on the outskirts of town when she saw them shoot down the traveling salesman who'd refused to part with his merchandise at their demanded price. When they spotted her watching from the tree line, she'd had no choice but to grab Emma from their rented room and flee. The hoofbeats slowed, and Naomi held her breath. She was painfully aware of how exposed they were despite the tall grass that partially concealed them. Emma stirred against her, making a soft sound of discomfort. "SHH, baby," Naomi whispered, stroking her daughter's hair with trembling fingers. "Be still." A horse whinnied somewhere to her left. They were spreading out, searching. Naomi pressed her forehead against Emma's and closed her eyes. After everything she'd endured, losing her husband Patrick to typhoid last winter, being forced to leave their small farm in Kansas when the bank took it, searching for any work that would keep them fed, it couldn't end like this, hunted down beside a nameless trail in the wilderness. "Over here." The shout sent ice through Naomi's veins. They'd found her. But before she could move, another sound cut through the night: more hoofbeats, approaching fast from the opposite direction. A rifle shot cracked through the air, followed by surprised shouts from the men who had been pursuing her. "That's far enough, gentlemen," a deep voice commanded. "Unless you're looking to meet your maker tonight." The standoff that followed seemed to last forever, with Naomi barely daring to breathe as she strained to hear the exchange. Eventually, after what sounded like heated words and threats, the hoofbeats of her pursuers faded into the distance. Silence fell once more, broken only by the soft nickering of a horse nearby. Naomi remained frozen, unsure if this new arrival posed yet another danger. "Madam." The voice was closer now, gentle but firm. "I know you're there. They've gone for now, but they'll be back with more men." Slowly, Naomi raised her head, clutching Emma tighter as she peered through the tall grass. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the night sky, leading a horse by its reins. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out the wide brim of a cowboy hat and the long duster that hung from broad shoulders. "I don't mean you any harm," the man said, keeping his distance. "Name's Samuel North. I've been tracking those Blackwell boys for 2 days now." He took a tentative step forward, then stopped when she flinched. "You're not safe out here, madam, not with your little one." Emma chose that moment to wake, whimpering softly as she blinked up at her mother. Naomi hushed her gently, her mind racing. She had no reason to trust this stranger, but she had nowhere to go and no means to protect herself against the men who would certainly return. "How do I know you're not with them?" she asked, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear. The man Samuel let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Fair question." He slowly reached into his pocket and withdrew something that gleamed in the moonlight. "U.S. Marshal, madam. Been after that gang since they robbed the bank in Billings last month." Naomi squinted at the badge he held out, but in the darkness, she couldn't verify its authenticity. Still, something in his steady voice and the careful way he kept his distance reassured her. "They killed a man," she said quietly. "In White Rock, I saw it happen." "I figured as much," Samuel replied. "That'd be why they're so determined to find you." He glanced over his shoulder, scanning the horizon. "Look, madam, I can't force you to trust me, but those men will be back by morning with reinforcements. You can't outrun them on foot and—" He nodded toward Emma. "You've got more than yourself to think about." The truth of his words struck Naomi like a physical blow. Her arms tightened around Emma, who was now fully awake and staring wide-eyed at the stranger. "What's your name, madam?" Samuel asked, his voice softening further. "Naomi," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Naomi Sullivan." "And this is Emma." Samuel nodded, tipping his hat slightly in greeting. "Miss Emma," he acknowledged, earning a shy smile from the child. Then he looked back to Naomi, his expression grave in the moonlight. "Mrs. Sullivan, I've got a cabin about 3 hours' ride from here. It's not much, but it's defensible, and those Blackwell boys don't know about it." He paused. "You're safe with me. You and your daughter both." Naomi looked into his eyes, steady and clear even in the dim light, and made her decision. Whatever this man's true intentions, staying where they were meant certain death by morning. "All right," she said, slowly rising to her feet with Emma in her arms. "We'll go with you." Samuel's relief was palpable. "Thank you for trusting me," he said, and then stepped forward, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "May I help you onto the horse? You can hold your daughter in front of you." With a nod, Naomi allowed him to assist her. His hands were strong but gentle as he helped her into the saddle, then carefully passed Emma up to her. The little girl, to Naomi's surprise, went without protest, settling against her mother's chest with curious eyes fixed on Samuel. "It's going to be a long ride," he warned as he took the reins and began leading the horse away from the trail. "But I know these lands better than most. We'll stay off the main paths." As they set off into the night, Naomi found herself studying the back of her rescuer. Samuel North was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to the hardships of frontier life. His hair, visible beneath his hat, was dark with hints of copper where the moonlight caught it. She guessed him to be in his early 30s, perhaps a few years older than her own 26 years. "Have you been a marshal long, Mr. North?" she asked, partly to break the silence and partly because knowing more about him might help ease her lingering doubts. 5 years now," he replied without turning, "and it's just Sam if you don't mind. Mr. North was my father." "Sam, then," Naomi agreed, "and you can call me Naomi." He glanced back at her then, a slight smile visible beneath the shadow of his hat. "Pleased to properly meet you, Naomi, though I wish the circumstances were better." They traveled in silence for a while, with Samuel leading them through terrain that seemed impassable in the darkness, dense stands of pine, rocky outcroppings, and across shallow streams. Emma eventually dozed off again, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the warmth of her mother's arms. "How long have you been on the run?" Samuel asked eventually, his voice low so as not to wake the child. 3 days, Naomi replied, the exhaustion of those desperate days suddenly crashing over her. "I had a little money saved, enough for stage passage to Helena where I have a cousin, but they were watching the station. She swallowed hard, remembering the moment she'd spotted one of the gang members lounging against the station wall, his eyes scanning the passengers. So we walked, kept to the woods as much as we could. Samuel nodded, a muscle tightening in his jaw. You're brave, Naomi Sullivan. I'm a mother, she corrected simply. There's no choice in it. They pressed on through the night, with Samuel occasionally stopping to listen or check their surroundings. True to his word, they reached the cabin as the first pale light of dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon. It was nestled in a small clearing backed by a steep rock face, with a creek running nearby. The structure was modest but solid-looking, with a small corral off to one side where another horse lifted its head in greeting as they approached. "Home, sweet home," Samuel said, helping Naomi down from the horse. Emma had woken as they approached and now stared wide-eyed at their surroundings. "Pretty," the little girl announced, pointing to the wildflowers that dotted the clearing. Samuel's face softened at the child's words. "Yes, it is, isn't it?" He looked almost embarrassed as he led them to the cabin door. "It's not much inside, I'm afraid. Bachelor quarters." The interior was indeed sparse but surprisingly neat. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs positioned nearby. A narrow bed stood in one corner, with shelves above holding books and a few personal items. A trunk sat at the foot of the bed, and various tools and supplies were organized along the opposite wall. "You and Emma can take the bed," Samuel said, setting down his saddlebags. "I'll make up something on the floor." "We couldn't possibly," Naomi began, but he waved away her protest. "Please, I insist." He moved to the fireplace, quickly getting a small fire going. "You must be hungry. I don't have much, but there's coffee and some jerky. I can make flapjacks too." The mention of food made Naomi's stomach clench painfully. She had rationed their meager supplies carefully, often going without so that Emma could eat. "That would be wonderful, thank you." While Samuel busied himself with breakfast preparations, Naomi took the opportunity to properly tend to Emma. She used water from a basin to wash her daughter's face and hands, combed through her tangled blonde curls, and changed her into the last clean dress from their small bundle of belongings. The domesticity of the scene was not lost on Samuel, who watched them from the corner of his eye as he mixed batter for the promised flapjacks. There was something about the tender way Naomi cared for her child that stirred something deep within him, an ache for something he'd long ago given up on having for himself. "Pancakes!" Emma exclaimed happily, when the first one was flipped onto a plate and presented to her. The child's delight brought smiles to both adults' faces. As they ate, Samuel outlined his plan. "We'll stay here for a few days. Let things quiet down. The Blackwell gang doesn't usually operate this far north, so they'll likely return to their usual territory after a while." "And then what?" Naomi asked, the temporary relief of safety already giving way to anxiety about their future. Samuel met her gaze steadily. "Then I'll escort you to Helena. Your testimony about what you witnessed would be valuable, but I won't ask that of you if it puts you and Emma at risk." Naomi nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you for everything." "No thanks needed," he replied, his eyes lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary before he looked away. "It's my job." But as he rose to clear away their plates, Naomi had the distinct feeling that there was more to Samuel North's assistance than mere professional duty. The thought both comforted and unsettled her, as did the realization that, for the first time since Patrick's death, she found herself noticing a man as something other than a potential threat or temporary employer. She pushed the thought aside. Their situation was precarious enough without complicating it further with inappropriate feelings for the man who had saved them. "You should get some rest," Samuel said, breaking into her thoughts. You're safe here, I promise. And despite everything, the danger still lurking beyond the cabin walls, the uncertainty of their future, the impropriety of being alone with a man she just met, Naomi believed him. The next few days settled into an unexpected rhythm. Samuel rose early each morning to check the perimeter, hunt, or tend to the horses while Naomi prepared breakfast from the supplies he provided. Emma, seemingly unfazed by their circumstances, delighted in exploring every inch of the cabin and the immediate surroundings under her mother's watchful eye. On their third evening, as Emma slept soundly in the bed, Naomi and Samuel sat by the fire sharing a pot of coffee. The domesticity of the scene was not lost on either of them, though neither mentioned it. "You never told me what brought you to these parts originally," Samuel said, breaking a comfortable silence. "Before everything happened." Naomi stared into her coffee, the memories both painful and distant. "Patrick, my husband, had tuberculosis. The doctor in Kansas said a drier climate might help him, so we sold everything and came west." She sighed. "It didn't help. He lasted only a few months after we arrived." "I'm sorry," Samuel said softly. "We were in Whiterock because I'd heard there was work at the hotel. Cleaning rooms, serving meals." She shook her head. "I never imagined we'd end up running for our lives." Samuel's expression darkened. "The Blackwell gang has been terrorizing this territory for years. Law enforcement is spread thin and they know it." "Is that why you became a marshal?" Naomi asked. "To make a difference." A shadow passed over Samuel's face. "My father was killed by outlaws when I was 15. Our farm in Colorado was raided while he was defending it. My mother and I survived only because he held them off long enough for us to escape." His jaw tightened. "I decided then that I'd do everything in my power to prevent others from suffering the same fate." Naomi's heart ached for the boy he had been. "Your mother must be proud of you." "She passed 6 years ago," he said quietly. "But yes, I think she would be. She always encouraged me to follow my conscience even when it led me down difficult paths." "Like harboring fugitives," Naomi offered with a small smile. Samuel chuckled. "You're hardly a fugitive, Naomi. You're a witness." And Emma? His expression softened as he glanced at the sleeping child. "Well, she's just a little girl who deserves a chance at life." The warmth in his voice when he spoke of Emma touched something deep inside Naomi. Patrick had been a good man, but he'd been ill for so long that he'd never truly had the chance to be a father to their daughter. Seeing Samuel's gentle interactions with Emma over the past few days had awakened longings she thought she'd buried alongside her husband. "What about you?" she asked, pushing those thoughts aside. "No wife waiting somewhere for you to finish this assignment." Samuel shook his head, a rueful smile playing at his lips. "The badge doesn't leave much room for settling down. Most women don't fancy being married to a man who might not come home any given night." "I can understand that," Naomi admitted, "though it seems a lonely life." "It has its moments," he agreed, "but it also has purpose. That counts for something." Their eyes met across the small space between them, and for a moment, Naomi felt as though she could see straight through to his soul, a soul that, like hers, carried both burdens and hopes that few would understand. The spell was broken by Emma turning in her sleep, murmuring something incomprehensible before settling again. Both adults looked away, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment they'd shared. "I should check the horses one more time," Samuel said, rising to his feet. "Get some rest, Naomi." She nodded, watching as he donned his hat and stepped out into the night. Only when the door closed behind him did she let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. 3 more days passed in relative peace, with Samuel venturing further each day to scout the surrounding area and ensure they weren't being tracked. On the afternoon of the 7th day since their arrival at the cabin, he returned with a troubled expression. "Riders," he said without preamble as he entered. "Two of them about 5 miles south. They're moving slow, but they're definitely searching for something." Naomi's hand flew to her throat. "The Blackwell gang," Samuel nodded grimly. "I recognized one of them. They're being cautious, but they're persistent. I think someone might have spotted us that night and given them a general direction to search." Fear gripped Naomi's heart as she glanced at Emma, who was contentedly playing with a small wooden horse Samuel had carved for her. "What do we do?" "We need to move," he said decisively. "There's an old trapper's cabin another day's ride north. It's even more isolated than this place." He began gathering supplies, his movements efficient. "We'll leave at dusk. Less chance of being spotted that way." Naomi immediately began collecting their few belongings, her hands trembling slightly. The past week had lulled her into a false sense of security, allowing her to almost forget the danger that had brought them to Samuel's cabin in the first place. As evening fell, they made final preparations. Samuel packed provisions, ammunition, and essential supplies while Naomi readied Emma for the journey, explaining in gentle terms that they were going on another adventure. "With Mr. Sam?" Emma asked, her eyes bright with excitement rather than fear. "Yes, sweetheart." "With Mr. Sam," Naomi confirmed, marveling at how quickly her daughter had grown attached to the marshal. When everything was ready, Samuel helped Naomi and Emma onto his more docile horse, then mounted the other himself. "Stay close," he instructed. "The terrain gets rough once we're past the creek." They set off into the gathering darkness, moving slowly to minimize noise. Emma, bundled warmly against the night chill, eventually fell asleep against her mother, allowing the adults to speak quietly. "I'm sorry about this," Samuel said after they'd been traveling for about an hour. "I thought we'd be safe there longer." "You have nothing to apologize for," Naomi insisted. "You've done more for us than anyone else would have." He glanced over at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "It's not just duty, you know." "What isn't?" she asked, though something in her already knew the answer. "Helping you and Emma," he said simply. "It started that way, but now—" He trailed off, seemingly unable to find the right words. Naomi's heart quickened. Samuel, whatever she might have said, was cut short by a distant sound that made them both freeze, the unmistakable report of a rifle, followed by another. "They're closer than I thought," Samuel murmured, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. "Change of plans. There's an old mining tunnel about a half-mile east of here. We'll hide there until I can be sure it's safe to move on." They altered their course, now moving with greater urgency. Emma stirred but didn't wake, a small mercy for which Naomi was grateful. The sound of the shots had not been repeated, but that offered little comfort. In the darkness and silence, danger could be anywhere. The mining tunnel appeared suddenly, a dark gash in a hillside partially obscured by overgrown brush. Samuel helped Naomi dismount, then took Emma from her arms so she could climb down safely. "I'll secure the horses a little ways off," he whispered. "Wait here." Naomi stood at the tunnel entrance, cradling Emma and straining to see through the darkness. The night had grown unnaturally quiet, as if the entire wilderness held its breath in anticipation of violence. Samuel returned minutes later, moving silently despite his size. "Inside," he urged, guiding them into the tunnel with a hand at the small of Naomi's back. The interior was damp and smelled of earth and minerals, but it was dry enough. Samuel produced a small lantern from his pack and lit it, keeping the flame low. "We should be safe here for a while," he said, setting down his rifle within easy reach. "The entrance is well hidden, and they won't expect us to hole up so close to where they're searching." Naomi settled Emma on a relatively flat area of ground, using their small bundle of belongings as a makeshift pillow. The child stirred but remained asleep, her face peaceful despite their dire circumstances. "What if they find us here?" Naomi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel's expression was grim in the lantern light. "They won't take you alive, not if I have anything to say about it." The fierce protectiveness in his voice both reassured and frightened her. "I don't want you dying for us, Samuel." "I'd rather that than the alternative," he replied simply. They sat in silence for a while, listening for any sound of pursuit. Eventually, Samuel spoke again, his voice low and introspective. "You know, I've spent 5 years chasing men like the Blackwells, bringing them to justice or trying to, but this past week—" He glanced at Emma, then back to Naomi. "This past week has made me question things." "What things?" Naomi asked. "Whether the path I chose is the right one," he admitted. "Whether there might be more to life than the badge." The implication hung in the air between them, neither willing to acknowledge it directly. Instead, Naomi reached out and placed her hand over his. "Whatever happens, Samuel, I want you to know that what you've done for us, it matters. It matters more than I can say." His fingers interlaced with hers, warm and strong. "Naomi, when this is over—" A sound from outside the tunnel silenced him instantly. Samuel extinguished the lantern with a swift movement, plunging them into darkness. His hand squeezed Naomi's once before releasing it, and she heard the soft scrape of his rifle being raised. For what seemed like an eternity, they remained motionless, barely breathing. Then came the unmistakable sound of a horse's snort, followed by a man's voice. "Check over by that hillside, Jeb. They gotta be around here somewhere." Naomi's blood ran cold. They had been found. Samuel leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "Stay with Emma. Don't make a sound, no matter what happens." Before she could protest, he was moving silently toward the tunnel entrance, his rifle ready. Naomi crawled to Emma's side, covering the child's body with her own and praying she wouldn't wake. From her position, she could just make out Samuel's silhouette at the tunnel mouth, a darker shadow against the night beyond. He was absolutely still, waiting. The voices outside grew closer. "You sure you saw tracks heading this way?" one man asked. "Positive," another replied. "Horse hooves fresh. They came right through here." Samuel tensed visibly, and Naomi knew he was preparing to fire if necessary. She closed her eyes, unable to watch what might happen next, yet knowing that if gunfire erupted, it would likely be the last thing Samuel North ever did. 2 against 1, with her and Emma to protect, the odds were not in his favor. A rustling sound came from deeper in the tunnel, causing Naomi's eyes to fly open in alarm. Something was moving in the darkness behind them. Fear clutched at her throat as she strained to see what new danger threatened. A bat swooped past, startling her so badly she nearly cried out. The creature fluttered erratically before finding the tunnel entrance and shooting out into the night directly past Samuel and toward the men outside. "Jesus!" one of them exclaimed. "Damn bats! Come on," the other said. "They wouldn't be hiding in there. Too many critters." The sound of retreating footsteps followed, then the jingle of bridles and creaking of saddle leather as the men remounted. "Let's try further north," one suggested. "They gotta be headed for the Canadian border." Samuel remained frozen in place until long after the sounds of the departing riders had faded. Finally, he turned and made his way back to where Naomi sat with Emma, still trembling from the close call. "They're gone," he whispered. "For now." Relief washed over Naomi so strongly that tears sprang to her eyes. Without thinking, she reached for him, needing the reassurance of human contact. Samuel's arms came around her immediately, strong and steady. "It's all right," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe." The embrace lasted longer than propriety would dictate, but neither seemed inclined to end it. When they finally drew apart, something had changed between them, a barrier broken, a truth acknowledged. "We should try to get some rest," Samuel said, though he made no move to release her completely. "We'll stay here until dawn, then move north as planned." Naomi nodded, reluctantly disentangling herself from his arms. "You need rest too, Samuel." He smiled faintly. "I'll keep watch for a while, you sleep." Despite her exhaustion, Naomi found it difficult to surrender to sleep with danger so close and her emotions in turmoil. But eventually, with Emma's warm weight against her and the steady presence of Samuel nearby, she drifted off. She woke to find pale morning light filtering into the tunnel and Emma sitting up beside her, chatting quietly with Samuel. The domestic scene struck Naomi's heart with unexpected force. This man and her daughter, already forming a bond that seemed both natural and right. "Mama!" Emma exclaimed when she noticed Naomi was awake. "Mr. Sam says we're going on the horses again today." "That's right, sweetheart," Naomi confirmed, sitting up and brushing dust from her skirts. "Are you excited?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Mr. Sam said I can sit with him this time." "Can I, Mama, please?" Naomi glanced at Samuel, who looked slightly embarrassed. "I hope that's all right," he said. "I thought it might be easier on you if you didn't have to hold her the entire journey." "Of course it's all right," Naomi assured him. "Emma clearly approves of the arrangement." The genuine smile that lit Samuel's face at her words warmed something deep inside Naomi. For a moment, she could almost forget the danger that had brought them together, could almost imagine a different life where mornings like this were commonplace. But reality intruded as Samuel began outlining their journey for the day. "We need to move quickly but carefully," he explained. "The good news is that they seem to think we're heading north toward Canada. We'll use that to our advantage and circle east instead, then south toward Helena." "How long will it take?" Naomi asked, helping Emma into her coat. 3 days, maybe 4, depending on weather and whether we need to take detours." Samuel's expression grew serious. "It won't be easy, Naomi. The terrain is rough and we'll need to avoid settlements where word might have spread." "We'll manage," she said with more confidence than she felt. "We've come this far." They emerged from the tunnel into a clear, cool morning. Samuel retrieved the horses from where he had hidden them, and they set off as planned, with Emma riding proudly in front of Samuel while Naomi followed on the second horse. The child's delighted giggles as Samuel pointed out wildlife and natural features along their route lightened the mood considerably. Even with danger potentially lurking around every bend, it was impossible not to be affected by Emma's innocent joy. They made good progress that day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold meal from their provisions. By nightfall, they had reached a secluded valley where a small stream provided fresh water. "We'll camp here," Samuel decided. "It's sheltered from view, and the stream will mask any noise we make." Setting up camp was a practiced routine by now. Samuel tended the horses and gathered firewood while Naomi prepared a simple meal and settled Emma for the night. The little girl fell asleep almost immediately, worn out by the excitement of the day's journey. "She's a remarkable child," Samuel observed as they sat by the small, carefully banked fire. "So resilient." "Children often are," Naomi replied, watching the firelight play across his features. "They adapt to circumstances that would break most adults." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "Still, she's fortunate to have a mother like you. Many would have crumbled under the strain you've endured." "I've had moments of weakness," Naomi admitted. "Nights when I've lain awake wondering how I would keep her fed and safe." She paused, gathering her courage. "But these past days with you, it's been different. For the first time since Patrick died, I haven't felt alone in carrying that burden. The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither had yet dared to voice directly. "Naomi," Samuel began, his voice rougher than usual. "I need to tell you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes, when we reach Helena after you're settled with your cousin." He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I'm resigning my position as marshal." Of all the things she had expected him to say, this wasn't one of them. "Because of us. Because of what happened, partly," he acknowledged. "But mostly because this past week has shown me what I've been missing. The life I've been living, always chasing, never settling. It's not the life I want anymore." Hope fluttered in Naomi's chest, but she tamped it down. "What do you want, Samuel?" His eyes, reflecting the dancing flames of their small fire, held her steadily. "A home. A family. Things I convinced myself weren't possible for a man like me." He swallowed visibly. "I know it's too soon, and maybe I'm a fool for even thinking it, but—" "You're not a fool," Naomi whispered, her voice catching. "Not at all." The distance between them seemed to shrink of its own accord. Samuel's hand came up to gently cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone with aching tenderness. "I never expected to find you," he said softly. "Not out there on that dark road, and certainly not here." His hand moved to indicate his heart. Naomi covered his hand with her own, her emotions too powerful for words. After a moment of shared silence, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a gentle, questioning kiss that held both promise and uncertainty. Samuel responded with equal gentleness, as if afraid she might shatter beneath his touch. When they parted, his eyes searched hers for confirmation that she felt what he did, that this unexpected connection between them was real and worth pursuing. "It's fast," she acknowledged, answering his unspoken question. "Maybe even foolish given everything." "But," he prompted, a smile tugging at his lips. "But some things don't need time to be true," she finished. "They just are." They sat together by the fire late into the night, talking in low voices about possibilities neither had dared consider before. By the time they finally retired Samuel to his bedroll and Naomi to hers beside Emma, a fragile future had begun to take shape between them. The next morning dawned gray and threatening, with heavy clouds rolling in from the west. They broke camp quickly, eager to make as much progress as possible before the weather worsened. "We'll try to reach the old stage-coach station by nightfall," Samuel said as they mounted up. "It's abandoned now, but the roof was still sound last time I passed through." Emma was unusually quiet as they set off, her small face serious as she scanned the horizon. "Bad men coming?" she asked suddenly, startling both adults. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" Naomi questioned, exchanging a concerned glance with Samuel. Emma pointed to a distant ridge. "Saw something shiny, like Mr. Sam's special glasses." Samuel immediately reined in his horse, his expression alert. "Binoculars," he muttered, reaching for his own field glasses. He scanned the ridge Emma had indicated, his jaw tightening. "Riders, 3 of them." Naomi's blood ran cold. "Can they see us?" "Not yet," Samuel determined, "but they're heading this way." He quickly assessed their surroundings. "There's a ravine about a mile east. It'll take us off our planned route, but it offers cover." They altered course immediately, moving as quickly as the terrain allowed. The first fat raindrops began to fall as they reached the ravine, a deep cut in the landscape that would shield them from view but make travel more difficult. "The rain might be a blessing," Samuel remarked as they picked their way carefully down the steep slope. "It'll wash away our tracks." By the time they reached the bottom of the ravine, the rain had intensified into a steady downpour. Emma, despite being wrapped in Samuel's oilskin coat, was shivering. "We need to find shelter," Naomi said, concerned for her daughter's health. She can't take being soaked through for hours. Samuel nodded grimly. There's a series of caves further along this ravine. Used to be a prospector's claim, but it was abandoned years ago. It's not far. They pressed on, the rain making the ground treacherous beneath the horses' hooves. Emma had stopped shivering, which worried Naomi more than if she'd continued. She recognized the signs of a child becoming dangerously cold. "Samuel," she called, her voice tight with fear. "Emma needs warmth. Now." He glanced back, took one look at the child's pallor, and made a decision. Dismounting swiftly, he lifted Emma from the saddle and cradled her against his chest. "You're going to be all right, little one," he murmured, rubbing her small body vigorously through the coat. "Just hold on a bit longer." To Naomi's relief, Emma's eyes fluttered open at his voice. "Cold, Mr. Sam," she mumbled. "I know, sweetheart. We're going to get you warm soon." He looked up at Naomi. "Take the reins of my horse. The caves are just around that bend. We need to hurry." They moved faster now, with Samuel carrying Emma while Naomi led both horses. The rain continued unabated, soaking them all to the skin despite their efforts to shield the child. The caves appeared suddenly dark openings in the ravine wall, partially obscured by brush and debris washed down by previous storms. Samuel headed for the largest, ducking inside with Emma still clutched protectively against him. "It's dry," he called back to Naomi. "Bring the horses in if you can." "There's room." The interior of the cave was indeed spacious, with a high ceiling that disappeared into darkness. The floor was sandy and relatively clean, suggesting the stream that had created the ravine rarely rose high enough to flood it. Naomi managed to coax both horses inside, grateful for the respite from the rain. Samuel had already set Emma down on a flat rock and was stripping off her wet clothes. "We need a fire," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "There's kindling in my saddlebag, and I've got dry matches in a waterproof tin." Working together, they soon had a small fire crackling in a depression in the cave floor. Emma, wrapped in the only dry blanket they possessed, was placed as close to the flames as was safe. Color gradually returned to her cheeks as the cave warmed. "That was too close," Naomi whispered, her hands still trembling as she stroked Emma's damp hair. Samuel nodded solemnly. "I should have anticipated the weather, should have moved faster." His self-recrimination was evident in every line of his body. "You couldn't have known," Naomi assured him. "And you saved her, Samuel. You acted quickly when it mattered." He didn't look convinced, but he squeezed her hand gratefully before moving to unpack their remaining supplies and check what could be salvaged. Their own clothes were soaked through, and they took turns changing behind an improvised screen of blankets hung from a jutting rock. Samuel's shirt and trousers were much too large for Naomi, but they were dry and warm. She rolled up the sleeves and pant legs, securing them as best she could with strips torn from her ruined petticoat. "You look." Samuel began when she emerged from behind the screen, then trailed off, a flush rising to his cheeks. "Ridiculous," Naomi supplied with a small smile. "Beautiful," he corrected softly. "Always beautiful." The simple sincerity of his words warmed her more effectively than the fire. She busied herself with spreading their wet clothes to dry, hiding her own blush. Emma woke properly as evening approached, hungry and much recovered from her brush with cold. Samuel produced jerky and hardtack from his supplies, supplemented by a handful of dried berries that Emma particularly enjoyed. "Are the bad men gone?" the child asked between bites, her eyes wide in the firelight. "I think so, sweetheart," Samuel assured her, though he exchanged a glance with Naomi that said otherwise. "The rain probably sent them looking for shelter just like us." "Good," Emma declared firmly. "I don't like them. They made Mama cry." Naomi pulled her daughter close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I'm not crying now, am I? And that's because we have Mr. Sam to protect us." Emma nodded solemnly. "Mr. Sam keeps us safe." She looked up at him with complete trust. Always. The simple faith in her daughter's statement brought tears to Naomi's eyes. Samuel, visibly moved, reached out to touch Emma's cheek gently. "Always," he promised. The storm raged through the night, with wind howling at the cave entrance and rain falling in sheets that obscured the view beyond. They took turns keeping watch, though Samuel insisted on taking the longer shifts to allow Naomi more rest. During one such shift, as Samuel sat by the cave entrance staring into the rain-drenched darkness, Naomi woke and joined him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, shoulders touching, before she spoke. "What will you do? After you resign the badge, I mean." Samuel considered the question. "I've been saving my pay for years, enough to buy a small parcel of land, maybe start a horse ranch." He glanced at her. "I've always had a way with horses." "I noticed," Naomi said with a smile. "Emma did too." "And what about you?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "What are your plans once we reach Helena?" Naomi stared out at the rain, weighing her response. "My cousin runs a millinery shop. She offered me work there after Patrick died, but I thought we needed a fresh start somewhere new." She shook her head ruefully. "I was wrong about White Rock, but right about needing a fresh start," Samuel pointed out. "Just not alone." The implication hung between them, neither willing to be the first to give it voice. Finally, Samuel turned to face her fully. "Naomi, I know this is sudden. I know you have every reason to be cautious, but I need you to know that what I feel for you and Emma, it's real. More real than anything I've felt in years." Naomi's heart hammered in her chest. "Samuel, I'm not asking for promises," he hurried on. "Just consideration. A chance to show you that what's grown between us this past week could be something lasting." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "You've already shown me, Samuel, every day in 1,000 ways." She took a deep breath. "When we reach Helena, Emma and I will stay with my cousin as planned, but perhaps we could explore what this might become, given time and proper circumstances." The smile that lit Samuel's face was worth every doubt she'd pushed aside to make the suggestion. "I'd like that very much," he said, lifting her hand to press a kiss to her knuckles. "Very much indeed." The storm broke by morning, leaving behind a washed-clean world glittering with raindrops in the early sunlight. They departed the cave with renewed hope, their spirits lifted by both the improved weather and the tentative understanding reached between them. Their journey continued eastward, with Samuel continually alert for signs of pursuit. By midday, they had left the ravine behind and were traversing a rolling prairie dotted with wildflowers and the occasional stand of cottonwoods. "It's beautiful," Naomi remarked as they paused to rest the horses beside a small pond. Emma was delighting in chasing butterflies a few yards away, her ordeal of the previous day apparently forgotten. "It is," Samuel agreed, though his eyes were on her rather than the landscape. "This country has its harsh sides, but there's beauty too if you know where to look." "And do you know where to look?" Naomi asked, catching the intent in his gaze. "I'm learning," he replied with a smile. "Every day." Their moment was interrupted by Emma's excited call. "Mama, Mr. Sam, look." They turned to find the child pointing at a distant hill, where a small herd of wild horses was silhouetted against the sky. The animals pranced and reared, their manes catching the sunlight as they moved. "Magnificent," Samuel breathed, his expert eye appreciating the lines and movement of the wild creatures. "That bay stallion would fetch a fine price if he could be gentled." Emma ran back to them, her eyes shining. "Can we have horses like that at our house?" The innocent question caught both adults off guard. Our house, Naomi repeated cautiously. Emma nodded vigorously. You said Mr. Sam was going to visit us lots and lots when we get to hell. Hell. Helena, Samuel supplied, his expression a mixture of amusement and something deeper. Yes. And then we're going to have a house together, right? Because Mr. Sam loves us and we love him. Emma stated this with the absolute certainty of a child who sees the world in simple truths. Naomi felt heat rise to her cheeks. Emma, sweetheart, it's not quite, that's the hope, little one, Samuel interrupted gently, meeting Naomi's startled gaze steadily. If your mother agrees someday, Emma beamed. She will. She told me she likes your smile. Now it was Samuel's turn to look surprised, a grin spreading across his face. Did she now, Emma? Naomi exclaimed, mortified. Well, you did, her daughter insisted. You said it was nice like sunshine. Samuel's grin widened impossibly further. Like sunshine, eh? We should get moving, Naomi said hastily, turning to mount her horse. We have a long way to go before nightfall. Samuel helped Emma back onto his horse, whispering something in the child's ear that made her giggle before mounting behind her. They set off again, with Samuel occasionally glancing at Naomi with that same irrepressible smile. Despite her embarrassment, Naomi couldn't help but smile back. There was something freeing about Emma's innocent revelation, as if by voicing what had been developing between the adults, she had somehow made it more real, more possible. They made good time that day, encountering no sign of their pursuers and finding easier terrain as they approached more settled lands. By evening, they had reached the abandoned stagecoach station. Samuel had mentioned a solidly built structure of logs and stone that offered welcome shelter. It's not exactly the Palmer House Hotel, Samuel apologized as they explored the dusty interior. But it's secure, and there are actual beds of a sort. Indeed, the station contained crude bunks built into the walls, with straw-filled mattresses that, while musty, were intact. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and shelves held abandoned supplies that Samuel pronounced still usable. We can have a proper hot meal tonight, he declared after inventorying their findings. Previous travelers left coffee, beans, and even some preserved fruit. Emma, delighted by the relative luxury of their accommodations, bounced from one bunk to another testing their comfort while Naomi set about sweeping years of dust from the floor. As darkness fell, the station transformed into a cozy haven. Samuel built a fire that drove away the chill, and together they prepared the most substantial meal they'd had since leaving his cabin, beans flavored with salt pork from their provisions, corn bread made from a cache of meal found in a sealed tin, and stewed dried apples for dessert. This is almost civilized, Naomi remarked as they sat at the rough-hewn table, the warm glow of the fire and a salvaged lantern casting dancing shadows on the walls. Don't get used to it, Samuel warned, though his eyes twinkled. Tomorrow night we'll likely be back to bedrolls under the stars. I like stars, Emma contributed sleepily from where she sat on Naomi's lap, fighting to keep her eyes open. But I like beds too, Samuel chuckled. A woman of discerning tastes. Like her mother, Naomi said with a meaningful glance at him over Emma's head. The warmth that suffused Samuel's expression had nothing to do with the fire's glow. Indeed, he agreed softly. After Emma was tucked into one of the bunks, the adults sat by the fire, savoring this rare moment of comfort and security. We should reach Helena in 2 days if we maintain our pace, Samuel said, his fingers absently tracing patterns on the back of Naomi's hand where it rested between them. Your cousin is expecting you. Not exactly, Naomi admitted. I wrote to her before leaving Whiterock, but I don't know if the letter reached her. It's been years since we've seen each other. Concern flickered across Samuel's face. "If for any reason the arrangement doesn't work out, it will," Naomi assured him, though privately she shared his concern. "Margaret has always been kind and we were close as girls. She'll help us." Samuel nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Just know that you have options, Naomi. I meant what I said about resigning the badge. I have savings enough to start fresh somewhere." The implication was clear, and Naomi's heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something that frightened and exhilarated her in equal measure. "Let's get to Helena first," she said gently. "One step at a time." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent warmth spiraling through her. "One step at a time," he agreed. The night passed peacefully, the most restful they'd had since beginning their journey. When morning came, they lingered longer than planned, reluctant to leave the relative comfort and safety of the station. "Just a few more days," Samuel reminded Naomi as they finally prepared to depart. "Then you won't have to run anymore." She nodded, but something in his tone gave her pause. "And you? Will you stop running too?" His eyes met hers, steady and clear. "I think I already have." They traveled through increasingly settled country that day, forcing them to move with greater caution. They avoided the main trails, instead keeping to the shelter of wooded areas and low valleys where possible. By mid-afternoon, they had reached a point where Samuel deemed it safe enough to approach a small homestead to replenish their water supplies. The farm appeared prosperous but modest, with neat fenced fields and a well-maintained cabin. "Stay with the horses," Samuel instructed, dismounting. "I'll speak to the owners." Naomi watched anxiously as he approached the cabin, his badge visible on his vest as a precaution. A bearded man emerged at his knock, listened to whatever Samuel said, then nodded and gestured toward a well in the yard. "Seems friendly enough," Naomi remarked to Emma, who was fidgeting impatiently in the saddle. "Can we go too, Mama? I'm tired of sitting." Naomi hesitated, then relented. "All right, but stay close to me." They dismounted and walked toward the farmhouse just as a woman emerged, wiping her hands on a worn apron. She greeted Samuel, then spotted Naomi and Emma approaching. "Well now, you didn't mention you had a family with you, Marshall," the woman said, her weathered face creasing in a welcoming smile. Before Samuel could correct her assumption, Emma piped up cheerfully. "Mr. Sam is going to be my new papa after we get to Helena." The woman's smile widened as both Samuel and Naomi flushed with embarrassment. "Is that so? Well, congratulations are in order then, I suppose." "It's not exactly," Naomi began, but the farmer's wife waved away her protest. "No need to explain, dear. Love finds its way in the strangest of circumstances out here." She turned to her husband. "James, fetch these good folks some of that apple butter and bread. They look like they could use a proper meal." Despite their protests, the couple James and Martha Wilson insisted on providing them with not only water but fresh supplies. Martha even produced a small rag doll for Emma, explaining that their own children were grown and gone. "This belonged to our youngest," she said, pressing it into Emma's hands. "She'd want another little girl to have it." Emma's delight was infectious, and Naomi found herself warming to the kind-hearted couple. It had been so long since they'd encountered simple human kindness with no strings attached. As they prepared to leave, Martha drew Naomi aside. "You hold on to that man," she said quietly. "Good ones are rare in these parts, and the way he looks at you and your child, well, that's something special." Naomi glanced at Samuel, who was deep in conversation with James about the best route toward Helena. "Yes," she agreed softly. "It is." They departed with renewed spirits and replenished supplies, the unexpected kindness of strangers bolstering their hope for what lay ahead. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Samuel suddenly reined in his horse, his posture alert. "Riders," he said tersely, "coming fast from the south." Naomi's heart sank. "The Blackwell gang." "Can't be sure at this distance," Samuel replied, scanning the horizon with his field glasses. "But we can't take chances. There's a stand of cottonwoods about half a mile ahead. We'll make for it and hope they pass by." They urged their horses to a gallop, Emma clutching her new doll tightly as she bounced in front of Samuel. The cottonwoods loomed larger as they approached, promising shelter among their thick trunks and rustling leaves. They had almost reached the trees when a shout behind them confirmed their worst fears. They had been spotted. "Go," Samuel commanded, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "Get to the trees and keep going. I'll hold them off." "No," Naomi cried, horrified. "Samuel, you can't." "I can and I will," he cut her off, his expression fierce. "Get Emma to safety, Naomi. That's what matters now." Before she could protest further, he had wheeled his horse around and was racing back toward their pursuers, rifle at the ready. Tears blurring her vision, Naomi urged her horse toward the cottonwoods. Emma was crying too, calling for Mr. Sam as they plunged into the shelter of the trees. The sound of gunfire erupted behind them, one shot, then another, followed by a fusillade that made Naomi's blood run cold. She wanted desperately to turn back to see what was happening, but her duty to Emma kept her moving forward. They crashed through the underbrush, the horse snorting in alarm at the pace she demanded. Behind them, the gunfire continued, sporadic now rather than constant. "Please, God," Naomi whispered, clutching Emma with one arm while guiding the horse with the other. "Please keep him safe." The cottonwood grove was deeper than it had appeared from a distance, extending into a small valley where a creek meandered between the trees. Naomi followed the watercourse, reasoning that it might provide cover and would eventually lead to larger water and perhaps civilization. The gunfire had stopped, the silence more terrifying than the noise had been. Had Samuel fallen? Was he pursuing them even now, wounded or worse? Emma's sobs had subsided to hiccuping whimpers. "Is Mr. Sam dead, Mama?" she asked in a small, frightened voice. "No, sweetheart," Naomi replied with more confidence than she felt. "Mr. Sam is very brave and very smart. He'll find us." But as the afternoon wore on with no sign of Samuel, doubt gnawed at her. The creek had indeed led to a river slow-moving and shallow enough to ford, which they did. On the other side lay more open country, with scattered farmsteads visible in the distance. Naomi faced a terrible choice: continue alone toward Helena, or wait for Samuel at the risk of being found by their pursuers. Her heart demanded the latter, but her head and her responsibility to Emma argued for the former. In the end, she compromised. They would find shelter for the night, and if Samuel hadn't found them by morning, they would press on toward Helena, where at least they might find help. A small, abandoned hunting cabin provided the shelter. She sought little more than a single room with a dirt floor, but it had a roof and walls that would hide them from casual observation. Naomi led the horse behind the cabin, unsaddled it to let it rest, and took Emma inside. The interior was dusty but dry. A crude hearth occupied one wall, but Naomi dared not light a fire for fear the smoke would give away their position. Instead, she made a cold camp, feeding Emma the bread and apple butter the Wilsons had provided. "When is Mr. Sam coming?" Emma asked repeatedly, clutching her rag doll for comfort. "Soon, sweetheart," Naomi assured her, though her own hope dimmed with each passing hour. Night fell, bringing a bone-deep chill that forced them to huddle together beneath their single blanket. Emma eventually fell into an exhausted sleep, but Naomi remained awake, straining to hear anything beyond the normal sounds of the wilderness at night. It was well past midnight when she detected the soft, deliberate tread of footsteps approaching the cabin. Her hand flew to the small derringer Samuel had insisted she carry, though she had never fired a gun in her life and wasn't entirely sure she could if necessary. The footsteps paused outside the door. Naomi held her breath, the derringer shaking in her grip. Naomi. The voice was barely above a whisper, but she would have recognized it anywhere. Naomi, are you in there? She nearly collapsed with relief. Samuel. The door creaked open and he slipped inside, a darker shadow against the night. Naomi scrambled to her feet and flung herself into his arms, heedless of propriety or anything else but the miracle of his presence. Thank God, she breathed against his chest. I thought I feared. I'm all right, he assured her, his arms tightening around her. A bit banged up, but nothing serious. In the faint moonlight filtering through the cabin's single window, Naomi could make out a gash along his temple and what appeared to be powder burns on one cheek. She reached up to touch his face gently, confirming he was real and not a desperate figment of her imagination. What happened? The gunfire. Samuel guided her back to the makeshift bed where Emma still slept, and they sat side by side, his arm around her shoulders. I managed to pick off one of them before they got close, he explained quietly. That slowed them down enough for me to reach the trees from another direction. They weren't expecting that thought I'd follow you directly. A grim smile crossed his face. I led them on quite a chase before doubling back. Lost my horse in the process, but at least they're looking in the wrong place now. How did you find us? Naomi asked, marveling at his tracking ability. I know how you think, he replied simply. Followed the creek to the river, saw where you'd crossed. After that, this was the most logical shelter in the area. His expression softened as he gazed down at Emma's sleeping form. Is she all right? Worried about you, Naomi told him. But yes, she's unharmed. Samuel closed his eyes briefly, relief evident in every line of his body. Good, that's good. They sat in silence for a moment, the reality of their narrow escape settling over them. Then, without warning, Samuel turned to her, his eyes intense even in the dim light. Marry me, he said abruptly. Naomi blinked, certain she had misheard. What? Marry me, he repeated, taking her hands in his. Today, tomorrow, whenever we can find a preacher. I know it's sudden, I know we haven't known each other long, but today when I thought I might never see you or Emma again. He swallowed hard. Life's too short and too uncertain to waste time, Naomi. I love you, both of you. And if you'll have me, I want to spend whatever years I have left making you happy. Tears welled in Naomi's eyes, spilling over to trace warm paths down her cheeks. Samuel, if you need time, I understand, he hurried on. We can wait until we reach Helena, get properly settled. I just needed you to know how I feel, what I want. Naomi silenced him with a kiss fierce and certain and full of everything she couldn't yet put into words. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you, Samuel North. The smile that transformed his face was like the sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual at first, then blazing with joy and promise. He kissed her again, more gently this time, sealing their commitment. As soon as we reach Helena, he said when they parted. No waiting if that suits you. Naomi nodded, her heart too full for words. Beside them, Emma stirred and blinked awake, her eyes widening when she saw Samuel. Mr. Sam, she exclaimed, launching herself at him with complete trust that he would catch her. You came back. Samuel gathered her close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Of course I did, little one. I promised, didn't I? Emma nodded solemnly against his chest. Mama was scared, she informed him. She kept looking out the window. Did she now? Samuel glanced at Naomi, his eyes twinkling. Well, I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere without both of you ever again. Emma pulled back to look at him seriously. Promise. I promise, he replied with equal solemnity. Then, with a glance at Naomi for permission, he added, In fact, your mama has agreed to marry me. Do you know what that means? Emma's face lit up. You'll be my papa, for real. The pure joy in her daughter's expression brought fresh tears to Naomi's eyes. After all they had endured, the loss, the fear, the desperate flight, this moment of perfect happiness seemed almost unreal. That's right, sweetheart, Samuel confirmed, his own voice thick with emotion. If that's all right with you. Emma's answer was to throw her arms around his neck and hug him fiercely. Over her head, Samuel's eyes met Naomi's, filled with a promise that went beyond words. They spent the remainder of the night planning their next moves. With Samuel's horse lost, they would need to share Naomi's, taking turns walking to spare the animal. Helena was still a day and a half's journey away, and they would need to remain vigilant. The good news, Samuel pointed out, is that the Blackwell gang won't be expecting us to continue toward Helena. They think we're headed north or west. Dawn broke clear and cool, finding them ready to depart. Samuel had fashioned a more comfortable arrangement for Emma on the saddle, using their blanket to create a secure seat where she could ride alone for short stretches, freeing the adults to walk together. They set off as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, their path taking them through increasingly settled farmland. By midday, they had reached a proper road, rutted and dusty, but well-traveled enough that they felt safer from ambush. We might find a farm wagon headed to Helena willing to give us a ride, Samuel suggested as they paused to rest in the shade of a large oak. Save our strength and get there faster. Fortune favored them that afternoon when a loaded hay wagon appeared, driven by an elderly farmer on his way to market. Samuel hailed him, explained they'd had trouble on the trail, and offered what little money they had left for passage to Helena. Keep your money, young man, the farmer replied after hearing their abbreviated story. My Eliza would tan my hide if she heard I charged a family in need. Climb aboard and make yourselves comfortable. The ride was jolting but far preferable to walking or sharing a single horse. Emma delighted in the novelty of riding atop the hay, and even Naomi found herself relaxing as the familiar rhythm of the wagon lulled her into a sense of security she hadn't felt in days. Samuel sat beside her, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders, occasionally leaning in to whisper observations or simply to press a kiss to her temple. The simple affection, offered so freely and naturally, filled Naomi with wonder. After months of loneliness and struggle, this unexpected gift of love seemed almost too precious to be real. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked quietly as he caught her watching him. "That I'm afraid I'll wake up and find this was all a dream," she admitted. "That I'll be back on that road, alone with Emma and running for our lives." His arm tightened around her. "Not a dream," he assured her, "and never alone again if I have anything to say about it." They reached Helena as evening fell, the small but growing city spread out before them in the valley. Lights twinkled from windows, and the sounds of civilization, voices, horses, the distant whistle of a train greeted them as they descended into the outskirts. Naomi directed the farmer toward her cousin's address, a modest two-story house on a side street not far from the main thoroughfare. Her heart pounded with anxiety as they drew closer. Would Margaret welcome them? Would she even be there? The wagon rolled to a stop, and Samuel helped them down, thanking the farmer profusely for his kindness. As the wagon pulled away, they stood before the house, a neat white picket fence enclosing a small front yard where late summer flowers bloomed. "Ready." Samuel asked, squeezing Naomi's hand encouragingly. She nodded, throat tight with emotion. As I'll ever be. They opened the gate and walked up the short path to the front door. Emma, suddenly shy, clung to Naomi's skirts as she knocked. The door opened to reveal a woman in her early 30s, her brown hair streaked with premature gray, her face creased with surprise as she recognized her visitor. "Naomi," she gasped. "Is it really you?" "Hello, Margaret," Naomi replied, tears springing to her eyes at the sight of her cousin. "I'm sorry to arrive unannounced." She got no further before Margaret enveloped her in a fierce embrace. "Don't you dare apologize. I've been worried sick since I got your letter. When you didn't arrive when expected, I feared the worst." Over Margaret's shoulder, Naomi exchanged a relieved glance with Samuel. Then Margaret pulled back, noticing Emma and Samuel for the first time. "And who are these?" she asked, her smile warm as she bent to Emma's level. "This must be your daughter. Hello, sweetheart." "I'm Emma," the child replied, her shyness evaporating under Margaret's kind gaze. "And that's Mr. Sam. He's going to be my papa." Margaret's eyebrows rose as she straightened to look at Samuel, who stepped forward and removed his hat politely. "Samuel North, madam. It's a pleasure to meet you." Understanding dawned in Margaret's eyes as she took in their travel-worn appearance and the protective way Samuel stood beside Naomi and Emma. "Well," she said briskly, "it seems you have quite a story to tell, but it can wait until you're fed and rested. Come inside, all of you." The interior of the house was warm and inviting, with simple but comfortable furnishings and the lingering aroma of baking bread. Margaret led them to the kitchen, where she immediately set about preparing a meal while they took turns washing up. Over bowls of hearty stew and slices of fresh bread, they related their ordeal: the murder Naomi had witnessed, the pursuit by the Blackwell gang, their narrow escapes, and finally, Samuel's proposal and their plans to marry. Margaret listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grave until they finished. Then she reached across the table to take Naomi's hand. "You've been through a terrible ordeal," she said gently. "But you're safe now, and you're welcome to stay here as long as you need." She glanced at Samuel. "All of you." Relief washed over Naomi. "Thank you, Margaret. I wasn't sure we're family," Margaret interrupted firmly, "and family sticks together." She smiled at Samuel, "especially when it's about to grow larger." The days that followed were a blur of activity. Samuel sent telegrams to his superiors, officially tendering his resignation and providing a detailed report on the Blackwell gang's activities. To his relief, they accepted both his resignation and his recommendation that another marshal be assigned to track the gang. Naomi and Emma settled into Margaret's guest room, while Samuel took a room at a nearby boarding house, visiting daily. Margaret, a widow herself, had built a successful millinery business in Helena and immediately offered Naomi a position, which she gratefully accepted. "I can't impose on you forever," Naomi insisted when Margaret protested that she needn't work right away. "Besides, I want to contribute, and I need to save for our future." A week after their arrival in Helena, Samuel appeared at Margaret's door dressed in his Sunday best, a nervous smile on his face and a small velvet box in his hand. "I thought perhaps—" he began as Naomi opened the door, then faltered, his usual confidence deserting him. Naomi smiled, taking his hand and drawing him inside. "Yes, I thought perhaps we might make it official," he managed, producing the box and opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "If you still want to, that is." Naomi's eyes filled with tears of joy as she extended her left hand. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The ring slid onto her finger as if it had been made for her. Samuel brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles just above the gleaming band. "I spoke with the minister at the church on Pine Street," he said. "He can perform the ceremony this Sunday if that suits you." "Sunday is perfect," Naomi agreed, her heart full to bursting. Emma, who had been watching from the doorway, rushed forward to examine the ring. "Pretty," she exclaimed. Then, looking up at Samuel with complete trust, she asked, "Can I call you Papa now?" Samuel knelt to her level, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Nothing would make me prouder, Emma." The wedding was a small but joyful affair. Margaret had insisted on making Naomi a new dress, pale blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes, and had fashioned a matching ribbon for Emma's hair. Samuel, standing at the altar in a new suit, looked both terrified and elated as Naomi walked toward him on Margaret's arm. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with Emma standing proudly between them as they exchanged vows. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Samuel's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of all that was to come. The small reception afterward at Margaret's home was attended by a few of her friends and some of Samuel's former colleagues who were passing through Helena. As the evening drew to a close, Margaret drew Naomi aside. "I have a wedding gift for you," she said, pressing a folded document into Naomi's hand. "It's not much, but I thought it might help with your fresh start." Naomi unfolded the paper to find a deed to a small parcel of land about 10 miles outside Helena, with a modest cabin already built upon it. "Margaret, this is too much," she protested, stunned by her cousin's generosity. Margaret shook her head firmly. "My Harold bought it as an investment before he passed. It's been sitting idle for years and I'll never use it. It's perfect for a family looking to put down roots." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes as she embraced her cousin. "I don't know how to thank you." "Be happy," Margaret replied simply. "That's thanks enough." When Naomi showed the deed to Samuel, his reaction mirrored her own disbelief and gratitude. "It's perfect," he declared after reading the description. "Close enough to town for supplies and Emma's schooling, but far enough out for privacy and room to raise horses." "Our home," Naomi whispered, the words both strange and wonderful on her tongue. Samuel gathered her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "The first of many blessings to come, Mrs. North." The following morning, they set out to view their new property, Emma chattering excitedly from her perch in the wagon Samuel had rented for the occasion. As they crested a small rise, the cabin came into view, rustic but sturdy, set against a backdrop of rolling hills with a clear stream running nearby. "It's perfect," Naomi breathed as Samuel helped her down from the wagon. "Almost perfect," he corrected with a smile. "It will be perfect once we're all settled in." They explored the cabin together, finding it simple but sound, with 2 small bedrooms, a main living area with a stone fireplace, and a basic kitchen. The previous owner had left some furniture, a table and chairs, a bed frame, a few shelves that would serve until they could acquire more. "We can move in next week," Samuel suggested as they stood on the porch, surveying what would become their homestead. "I can start fencing the north pasture for horses right away." Emma had discovered a patch of wildflowers nearby and was carefully selecting blooms for a bouquet, her concentration intense as she deliberated over each choice. "Look at her," Naomi said softly. A month ago she was running for her life, and now, she blinked back tears. "Children are remarkable, aren't they? So resilient." Samuel's arm came around her waist, drawing her close against his side. "Like their mothers," he observed. "You're the strongest person I know, Naomi North." The name, her new name, still sent a thrill through her. "I wasn't strong until I had to be," she demurred. "For Emma's sake." "No," Samuel disagreed gently. "You've always been strong. You just needed the right circumstances to discover it." Emma approached then, proudly presenting her bouquet. "For our new house," she declared, "to make it pretty." Naomi accepted the flowers with due solemnity. "They're beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you." As Emma skipped off to continue her explorations, Samuel turned Naomi to face him. "I made a promise to both of you that night on the trail," he reminded her. "Do you remember what I said?" Naomi nodded, the memory crystal clear despite the fear and exhaustion of that moment. "You said we were safe with you." "And you always will be," he vowed, his eyes holding hers with the same steadfast intensity they had that night. "Whatever comes, whatever challenges we face, that promise stands." "I know," Naomi whispered, rising on tiptoe to brush her lips against his. "I've never doubted it, not for a moment." The days stretched into weeks, and the weeks into months. The small cabin became a home filled with laughter and love. Samuel's dreams of a horse ranch began to take shape as he acquired his first breeding pair, a fine stallion, and 2 mares, and word of his skill with the animals spread throughout the territory. Naomi divided her time between helping at Margaret's shop in town and making their home a haven. Emma thrived, starting school in Helena and making friends with neighboring farm children. As winter descended on Montana territory, blanketing their little homestead in snow, they gathered each evening by the fire, sharing stories and dreams for the future. On Christmas Eve, with Emma long since asleep in anticipation of morning's gifts, Samuel presented Naomi with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, surprised by the unexpected gift. "Open it and see," he urged, a nervous eagerness in his expression. Inside the package was a handcrafted wooden picture frame, and within it, a sketch remarkably detailed and lifelike of Emma laughing as she chased butterflies. "Samuel," Naomi breathed, stunned by both the gift and the talent it revealed. "I didn't know you could draw like this." He shrugged, a flush creeping up his neck. "I used to sketch when I was on long trails, helped pass the time." He hesitated. "Do you like it?" "Like it? I love it," she assured him, tracing the lines of Emma's face in the drawing. "It captures her perfectly, I thought." Samuel began, then cleared his throat and tried again. "I thought perhaps I might do another soon, of all 3 of us." Something in his tone made Naomi look up sharply. "Samuel." His smile was both tender and hopeful as he reached out to place his hand gently on her abdomen. "Unless I'm mistaken, Mrs. North, our family portrait will need to include a new member by next summer." Naomi's eyes widened. She had suspected, had noticed the signs, but had been waiting to be certain before sharing her hopes. "How did you know?" "You've been tired lately, and a bit green around the gills in the mornings," he explained, his expression softening further. "Plus, you've been knitting something small when you thought I wasn't looking." Tears of joy welled in Naomi's eyes as she covered his hand with her own. "Are you happy?" In answer, Samuel gathered her close, his kiss conveying everything words could not: his joy, his love, his promise to cherish her and their growing family for all the days to come. As they sat together before the fire, snow falling gently outside their window, Naomi reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that desperate night beside a dusty trail, where a stranger's voice had promised safety, to this home they had built together, it seemed both a lifetime and a mere heartbeat had passed. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, his fingers gently combing through her hair as she rested against his chest. "That sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest dawns," she replied softly. "If I hadn't witnessed that terrible crime, if we hadn't been forced to flee." She looked up at him, her heart in her eyes. "I never would have found you." "Oh, I don't know about that," Samuel mused, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I like to think some things are meant to be, regardless of the path taken to reach them." Naomi smiled, settling more comfortably against him as the fire crackled and popped in the hearth. "Perhaps you're right. Perhaps we would have found each other anyway." "Without a doubt," Samuel assured her, his voice certain. "Some souls are destined to meet, to recognize each other across any distance or circumstance." As the clock on their mantel chimed midnight, heralding Christmas Day, Naomi offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the blessings that had arisen from what had once seemed like unending tragedy, for Emma's safety and happiness, for Samuel's unwavering love, for the new life growing beneath her heart, and for the home they had created together. Outside, the Montana winter continued its silent work, coating their little homestead in pristine white. Inside, wrapped in warmth and love, the North family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. And in the years to come, when Emma was grown with children of her own, she would often ask to hear the story of how her parents met, of how her mother had slept beside the road with her child, and how a kind-hearted cowboy had promised them safety and delivered so much more. "Tell me again, Mama," she would ask, even as a young woman. "Tell me about the night you met Papa." And Naomi would smile, catching Samuel's eye across the room, and begin the tale that never grew old in the telling. "It was a dark night beside a dusty Montana trail, and I was more afraid than I had ever been in my life. Then I heard a voice strong and steady say the words that would change everything.